What's going on, everyone, and thanks for joining me for another great conversation. As always, I appreciate you guys. This next conversation you're either with or you're against, but it's something that you should listen to and maybe be open-minded about, and that's about gun ownership. We need to be able to defend ourselves and be able to protect the lives of our loved ones, and there isn't a better tool equipped for the job, but only if you're responsible and only if you train properly. My next guest is all about that, and he has shown me a lot, and I'm sure you're gonna get a lot. I introduce to you guys the powerful Uncle Zoe. All right, Zoe, how's it going? I was just thanking you for coming on the show because, at first we talked about it a few weeks back, if I'm not mistaken, but I still felt kind of weird after a long gap in there just to say, hey, are you ready? And here you are. Thanks a lot for your time, man.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, you're right. We did talk about it for a little while ago. I don't remember if it was a couple weeks or several weeks. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool to connect, and it'll be interesting to looking forward to the discussion we're about to have for sure.
Yeah. I was attracted. You're an awesome follow on Twitter. I was attracted to your page because compared to everybody else who's talking about what you're talking about, and we'll get into that in a little bit. You seem to do it in a clean, concise, and straightforward manner, not like a show-offy type way, not like a hey, here's what I got type way, but actual practical information. And as somebody myself who's a new gun owner, about 4 months now. That stuck out to me, man, and I gave you an instant follow, and you've been fantastic. So can you let the listeners know a little bit about you and your background?
Sure, and appreciate your kind words there. So my background is actually, if we go way back, I didn't grow up around guns. I don't have a law enforcement background. I was never in the military, and so for me, it was just something that wasn't even something that crossed my mind for many years. In fact, for a long while, I kind of had the stigma that I think a lot of people still do, that really the only two kinds of people that have guns or have access to guns are either bad guys or cops, and cops painted as the good guys and whatnot. I think those lines have been blurred a little bit with recent current events, but regardless, that mindset is still present, and it's one that I had. I think it was back around 2013. Something for me just kind of clicked after a friend that I trusted took me out to the range to go shooting. Just kind of out of the blue, hey, I'm going to go to the range this weekend. You want to go with me? And I was like, oh, you own guns? And that was like the first thing that just kind of clicked. I'm like, you're not a bad guy and you're not a cop. Why do you own a gun? And went out, learned a little bit about it. Turned out that it wasn't this big scary thing. That, again, I didn't think it was scary so much as it's just I didn't understand it. And after that, it just kind of, the dominoes started to fall. And I was like, oh, hey, you know what? This is actually a pretty neat tool. I could see the value of having this as an emergency tool, similar to, whether it's your seatbelt or a fire extinguisher in the house. And so I got into it from that perspective. Bought my first gun and got my concealed carry permit here in Texas. It was CHL back in the day. Now it's an LTC. And I just kind of let it ride and just bought a couple different things. And I got into hunting. And for several years, though, I'm going to say I was ignorantly blissful with my knowledge there, because I could put holes on paper and I knew how to safely load and unload the firearms. And that's all fine and dandy. But over the past couple of years, I started exploring additional courses as other family members started having interest. And so I wanted to increase my proficiency with them to be able to share good knowledge with them. And I started realizing really quickly that I didn't know what I didn't know. And you don't even know that you don't know it.
Right.
And that's just the last 3 years has just kind of been a blur of a lot of training, exploring different aspects of shooting sports, getting into competitive shooting, setting goals for myself and bucket list items. Like I got into long range shooting. I was curious about it. So I decided, hey, you know what? I want to go shoot a target at 1,000 yards, and I want to figure out how to do this. So I did that, and just different things like that. And as part of that process that I've gone through it, about 2 years ago when I started my blog, I realized that I was just meeting a lot of people that were in that same space that I was, where they weren't sure, they're just getting into it, they don't know what they don't know, and there's just a lot of bad information. And depending on the medium that you're communicating with, some people are put off by the way that they joke around, or they just, you see a lot of chops getting busted as people post pictures of their equipment. All of a sudden, oh man, that's terrible, and people start raining down on it and that kind of thing. And it's just, and it puts people off, right? So I took the approach of, look, I'm on a journey, and I want to share my journey so that others who are curious about it can either take the leap, or at the very least, learn at a faster pace, and maybe avoid some of the mistakes that I made in that process, whether that was spending money on something that was completely worthless, or I don't know, whatever else happens along that process. And that's who I am and where I've been and where I'm at today.
Yeah, that's an awesome journey there in itself. And yeah, I think you're doing your job successfully, because once again, I think that's what I like about you and what your content is that it's not showboaty and it's not picking on people. It's actually just pointing them in the right direction, right? I like to think about like somebody going off track a little bit, and you kind of just line them right back where they need to be going. And I appreciate that. Now, I also, just to give you my little journey, never was around guns. I mean, I grew up in, low poverty housing, so there was guns around. I knew what a gun was. I knew all that. I was more the introverted guy that didn't get into all the ruckus, so I stayed away from that. But then when I, started to venture out into life, I didn't care about guns at all. I live in Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, very liberal state, it's one of those things where it's like, you don't feel like you need it around. And then last year happened. Right. And I can't pinpoint one exact thing that happened last year that happened. I couldn't even tell you if it's just that I had a bunch of extra free time on my hand, but I noticed how important it was to be able to protect my loved ones. I have kids and I have a wife, and be able to protect them when it looks like everything around me is falling apart. Right. So it's like, if they can't protect us like they say they can, I need to be able to take that mantle and be able to protect my family and protect my own. And that's when I went down, let's say, the gun rabbit hole. And you might laugh at this. I mean, I heard you say Texas there, so I'm sure it's completely different. So I applied for my LTC, my license to carry, in June of last year. I didn't get it till January 7th of this year. So it took literally about a 6-month time period to run some paperwork. I mean, and my background's clean. I did the classes they wanted. I paid all the courses that they wanted. And then I got my LTC, and then here in Massachusetts, for some reason, if the gun you want is not available, you're going to wait 3 to 4, maybe 5 months in order to get that gun. And I do understand back supply issues, and I do understand that. But as somebody who's new and somebody who wants to advance his learning, I want to have this conversation, because right now I'm having a hard time doing that, besides doing what you said, which is putting a hole in a paper.
Yeah, that story that you just shared, I'm not laughing at it, because it's very similar to the path that I went into. It was, this is actually a piece of a tool for emergencies. Granted, there's a lot of other things that you can do with it, but I think that's where a lot of people start, especially with what we've seen happening over the course of the last 18 months. And that's a good place to start. The LTC process is probably a little bit faster, actually a lot faster here in Texas. Yeah. Actually, my best friend who I've known since the second grade, the guy who took me to the range for the first time, he finally got his. Because we've kind of changed spots. When I first got into it, he was teaching me everything he knows. And when my interest just started building as much momentum as it did, I kind of surpassed his knowledge in some areas. Mm-hmm. And so now I've kind of become his mentor in certain areas as well too. So he got his LTC, and I think that process took maybe less than a month to go from getting paperwork filed to actually having it in hand. Could be wrong. It might have been a little bit longer than that, but that's about what it seemed like to me, as an outsider looking in.
Yeah. Yeah, six months was just insane, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, it's, I did the firearms course. I was able to, give them the certificate and all they needed, but they couldn't give me any reason besides COVID-19, of course, of why it would take 6 months to literally just approve some paperwork. I mean, at that point, everything's already done. It's set in stone. I paid my fees. Let's roll. And it took 6 months for them to do it. And then, like I said, now I'm kind of in this stranglehold where I know you can find 9mm bullets out there, which is, what I have. I have a 9mm handgun. It's either you pay a ridiculous $80 price tag for a box of 50, or they give you this thing where it's like, unless you buy a handgun, we can't sell you a box And that's what's happening here in Massachusetts at the moment.
Wow. Yeah, and you guys have the some really, really strict laws on shipping too. Like I don't think you can get ammo shipped to you.
Nothing. I see all your posts that you keep sharing where it's like, hey, this is available. And I'm like, not to me.
Oh man, that's hard. That's hard.
Yeah, man. And the same thing with bullets. I can't even get, bullets mailed into me, which I know I can find them on the internet. It's just, Massachusetts won't allow you to bring anything in.
Yeah.
It's very strange. So, anyways, let's go back to, I want to focus on sort of the listeners here, right? So I would like to think the people that are listening to me are probably either on the fence or they're new gun owners themselves. How do you, what's your go-to advice for onboarding people that are either on the fence or?
Yeah, it's a little bit different for the two different people that you've just identified. For those that are on the fence, I think the most important place to start is deciding what the primary function that you want a firearm for is, because that is going to lead your initial purchase decisions. In my mind, there's three different categories of firearms or platforms, right? You've got the handgun, the rifle, and the shotgun, or the scatter gun, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And each of those platforms has its own strengths and weaknesses and limitations, and it's important to know those so that you can apply it correctly. Each of those also has a different learning curve depending on what you want to do with it, and that's important as well too, because as you said, that's what we'll get to. New gun owners, it's how do we increase proficiency and getting over those learning curves. But as a new gun owner, I think it's important to start there and to be honest with what your immediate needs are, and realizing that if you compromise to try to get a do-it-all gun, and that's a mistake that I made right out of the gate, you're going to end up with a Swiss Army knife. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I love my Swiss Army knives. They're great tools. They're very utilitarian, but they're not really good at any one thing. They do a lot of things okay,
yeah.
But they're not great at anything. And that's why it's important, because it's typically, you want the right tool for the right job. And so it's important to identify what's the most important job you want to accomplish and begin with that in mind before you start making your purchases.
Yeah. What's an example of a dual gun?
Oh, I mean, I don't think there is a dual gun now that I look at it again, right? But like when I first started, I was like, well, I want a handgun because I had intent to carrying, which I think I did that right. That was the idea. But because I was going to carry it, I wanted something small, but I also wanted something that had a lot of stopping power. And if you want to, we can talk about that. That's a myth, and I think something that's talked about that really has very little value, especially when it comes in terms of self-defense. So I ended up with a single stack, micro compact 45 ACP handgun that is just horrendously brutal on the hands, not fun to shoot. And I ended up not training as much as I should have with it. And once I realized that, I compromised on so many different aspects of the firearm, I still have it because it was my first firearm, so it has a little bit of sentimental value to me, but it doesn't get shot. I don't think I've shot that thing in 3 years. It just kind of sits there and collects dust.
Yeah.
So that to me is not only did I buy a bad tool, or not a bad tool, it's an ineffective tool for what I wanted to do with it, or because I expected too much out of it. But it's also a financial mistake. That could have been $600, $700 that could have been better put towards a better tool for what I really had in mind. So, that's a long discussion that we can definitely go down, is, what is the right tool? I'll let you guide me with where you want to go with that. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that one right now. And once again, I'm new. So right off the bat, I kind of feel I didn't make a mistake. It's a small concealed carry, 9mm gun. It's actually a company that's here from where I'm from. And it's a Car PM9. And and it's, I took it to the range, and this was my experience. Now, I'm by no means, an experienced shooter. So I'm shooting this PM9, and everything seems to be verging bottom right. And then my sister-in-law, she had herself one of the newer Tauruses, the G3C, I believe is what it is. And when she let me take a few shots out of that thing, I mean, I was, close to bullseye, if not, near that area every single time. A complete different night and day situation. And I paid, because of, the scarcity of Massachusetts, I paid about $650 for that car. And she told me she paid about $400 for her Taurus G3. And I thought the same thing you just said. I think I just wasted my money on this first one.
Yeah. So there's, I mean, there's so much there to unpack as to why those are going bottom right.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that, and this has just been my experience in general, is the guy behind the counter at a gun store generally doesn't know how to fit a gun properly to a hand. And it sounds crazy, but it's like, you know, if you buy pants that are too tight, well, you can't breathe. If you buy pants that are too loose, well, they fall to your knees. You're constantly picking them up. So they're suboptimal for you as a person, right?
Right.
A handgun is, and your hand is very much the same way. I have an issue with mine that it took me years to learn this. And I went through a number of different handguns where I couldn't figure out why I wasn't shooting it well. And they didn't fit my hand. I have short, fat sausage fingers and a really meaty palm.
Okay.
So for me, trigger reach is an issue. And when I'm extending that finger to reach the trigger and that grip is too wide, you've actually got the muscle that's on your index finger that when you go ahead to go to squeeze it and that flexes, when you go to press that trigger, that actually causes the muzzle of the gun to move just ever so slightly, you know, just a millimeter. And all of a sudden your shots are going left or they're going right, depending on which hand you're using and how it's going. It could be that. There's also just technique that needs to be developed, and it might be easier with a particular grip for you to perform that technique well versus with another one. But again, it's not something that as a new shooter or a new gun owner, you're going to know without having some experience. And it's not something that the typical salesperson behind the gun counter is going to know either. They might, depending on their level of proficiency with firearms, but in my experience, they're maybe collectors themselves, or maybe they're enthusiasts to a certain extent. Doesn't necessarily mean they're proficient in that particular group. And their job really is there to sell firearms. So yes, they will try to steer you towards the best product for you and your needs and those kinds of things like any good salesman will, but they're not necessarily going to be there to diagnose specifically what your very detailed needs are.
Right.
So did you waste money on it? I don't know. That could be resolved with proper development of fundamentals, including your grip and your trigger control and those kinds of things. Or it could very well be that maybe just that front sight is just a little bit off and needs to be adjusted for windage, and all of a sudden you're dead on center.
Okay.
There's a couple things that could happen as far as that goes.
Yeah, I had a buddy tell me also. I'm probably getting this wrong, but the pressure on the trigger could be.
Yeah.
I don't know if the pressure is the right word, or he has some type of wording for it, but basically, it took a lot more to get the trigger to pull back on mine than it did on the Taurus, I guess.
Yeah, it's the trigger pull is
okay.
What we call that. So when you talk about a handgun, a striker fired handgun, like what you're talking about here, you've got a couple different stages that the trigger goes through as it flows. First, you've got the slack, which is when you start pressing the trigger back to when you feel a little bit of resistance. So we call that the wall. So there's a little bit of movement, usually doesn't take a lot of pressure. The wall is once all the mechanisms that move that trigger to that point have now engaged and you're getting ready to break the sear. That's the actual pressure that you need to break that's the trigger break, right? To break the wall. And that's when it fires. And the amount of pressure that's necessary to get past the wall and to actually to fire the firearm at that point can vary from firearm to firearm. Now, this is where we get into finesse and trigger control and those kinds of things. It's that process of getting past the wall. It's going to be, the level of difficulty is going to depend on how good the trigger is, how smooth it is across that break, how much pressure it requires, and how good you've developed your muscle memory with your index finger to break the trigger at that point. So would a different handgun or a better handgun maybe help you? Possibly. For most people who are just getting started, it's really not going to be that big of a difference. There's so many different things that we're talking about as far as what it could actually be.
Right.
Where it's going to take time for you to figure out and learn and become proficient with it, to self-diagnose those things and figure out what it needs, what you need to do to get that shot back on center.
Yeah. No, I definitely didn't quit on her. I still got her around. She's my daily carry or whatever. But just to test my theory, I went first to try to get one of those Tauruses. And I think it was either you or somebody else on Twitter was like, "Nah, man, you don't want that." So I didn't know. It matched a pattern that most people around me were telling me about Taurus. So I just went and got a shield, an MMP9, which is obviously one of the standard ones across the country.
Yeah.
But like I said earlier, Massachusetts, I ordered it. I think we're going on 4 weeks now, and I have no word. I have no word when it's going to show up. Mind you,
Wow.
Springfield is near where I'm at, which is where their factory is based out of. So it's very weird, and I can't tell if it's literally like a delay, like a squeeze in product manufacturing, or if it's literally Massachusetts just playing dumb games to delay me from being able to get some.
Or a little of both.
Or a little of both. I mean, I do know if you like with the car, I walked right in and I liked it, I wanted it, and you could buy if it's there. But the
Sure.
ordering thing is just a weird
Yeah.
thing, and the bullet thing is extremely weird.
Yeah. I think it's more supply chain than anything else right now.
Okay.
I know there's a lot of online manufacturers that I've seen that are taking back orders for firearms, and they're talking about 4 to 6 month
Yeah.
lead times and those kinds of things. So I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But I don't know Massachusetts well enough to know if there's something else happening there politically or legally or other things that are going on with the regulations that Massachusetts has.
Right. It's a stranglehold because the crux that I have now is how much ammunition do I keep for defense, and how much ammunition do I use to practice more.
Mm-hmm.
So now because it's not like I could just walk into the range and get like a nice $30 box or something like that. I either have to get gouged or I have to buy a handgun apparently.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a tight squeeze, and I don't know if you were in that situation and you would have to put a percentage. What would you go with versus keeping some versus spending some? Because you have to
Yeah, I
shoot to
don't
get
know.
better.
You do. Well, there's two things that you need. It's a combination of dry practice and live fire practice that you need to do to get better.
All right, give me more.
And we can talk about that.
Yeah, give me
but
more.
let's talk about the ammunition there for a second. How much of each should you have? So for me, at a minimum in my head, would be to have a year supply of defensive ammunition.
Wow.
Okay. So what's a year supply? It's not that I'm going to shoot it all year long. It's actually most of the time I'm going to, because I carry my weapon daily, I'm going to load it with self-defense ammunition. And when I go to do my daily practice, because I do practice daily, dry practice, I'm going to take the ammunition out, and that one round that was chambered, that's typically going to go in a chambered once bucket and pile. And when times were good and ammunition wasn't hard to find, that would actually be the same thing as my practice pile or my training pile of ammunition. Just because if you constantly rechamber the same round, the primers on it can break, and there's other things that can happen to cause reliability issues. And that's not something I want to have with a defensive round when I need to use it defensively. So that's a rule of thumb that I've had. So for me, that translates into having at least on hand, 365 rounds of defensive ammunition at home so that I can cycle through them throughout the year and replace them on an annual basis. In terms of practice ammunition, if I'm not trying to hedge my personal inventory on how much I want to practice, it's going to be dependent on the person how much they actually get out and practice. For most of the people who shoot competitively or who I know who are good shooters, their typical range session is between 100 to 200 rounds. Sometimes they do that once a month. A lot of people will do it even more frequently. And again, more frequent practice is better than less frequent, larger volume practice. And about 100 to 200 rounds is probably about the right amount where you need to actually develop and ingrain that muscle memory and retain, for your brain to retain what it feels like to manage the recoil on that firearm for when you need to do it. So if you're practicing, 100 rounds, or if you're doing a 100-round session right now because ammo is hard to find and you're doing that once a month, well, do the math. That's 1,200 rounds a year that you need.
Yeah.
If you're doing that once a week, and ideally that's where I'd like to be, and I like to shoot at least a live fire once a week. Well, now you're talking 5,200 rounds that you need to have a year supply of that. Maybe you don't need to have that much on hand all the time. If you can get it regularly, pre-COVID, I would keep probably 3 to 4 months of practice ammo on hand just because space. And I could budget that out throughout the year rather than trying to have a large supply and carry that out. And anyway, so how much you keep on hand is up to you, but that's about how much you're going to need throughout the year, and figuring out how to budget that and how to acquire that is a challenge right now.
Yeah.
So
you want to walk through the dry fire? I didn't know. I don't know what dry fire is. Yeah, let's do that.
So dry fire is literally pulling the trigger on your firearm when there's no ammunition in it. So it's not going to go bang, it's going to go click. You'll get a lot of folks who will say, hey, dry fire is bad for your firearms. This actually comes from a lot of history from older firearms, where you could potentially destroy the firing pin and the firing mechanisms that are in the firearm when you're not shooting it with a live round. Most modern firearms, center-fired pistols, aren't going to have a problem with that. You can still cause excessive wear because you are working the springs and the other mechanisms that are in there, and the firing pin is coming to a halt as it goes through the firing pin channel and to hit air. But we're talking about hundreds and thousands of trigger pulls, if not millions of trigger pulls, before we actually start seeing any real issue with dry practice. So but as it is with any practice, whether you're doing live fire or dry fire, to get better, you have to have a plan, right? So what is it that I'm going to work on? And for me, dry practice is a daily thing. It's usually 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes I'll do a little bit more, but it's with a goal in mind. So today I'm going to practice on my draw, right? So I've got my concealed carry holster inside the weight band in the place. I've cleared my firearm. I've got ammo way far away, ideally in another room, but just to where I'm not going to mistakenly grab a magazine that's got ammo in it and load it and try to rack it and get busy with it while I'm at home and not at a firing range. So again, practice safe things, right? Clear the firearm, make sure that it's clear, get the ammo far away from you, to where you're not going to subconsciously reach for it and get yourself into trouble. And then it's get to work, right? I'm going to put my firearm in my holster, and I'm going to work on drawing that firearm and presenting it. Maybe I'm even going to squeeze the trigger to get that first shot, reset the firearm, put it back in. And there's different ways on different philosophies on how to do this. I like to start with, one of the best tools that you can get is a good shot timer. I'll put a 2-second part time on that. So what that'll do is when I hit I'll do a random start with a delayed random start with a part time. And what that does is when I hit go on that shot timer, it'll beep within 1 to 3 seconds of me pressing the go button. So it'll be semi-random. So I have to react to a stimulus. And then 2 seconds after that goes off, and I'll try to shorten that up, but 2 seconds after that, I get a second time that says your time is up. Right. So what I'm going to try to work on is to get my firearm out, good grip, presented, and get that first shot off. And I'm going to watch the sights to make sure they don't move too much, again, because we want to develop good muscle memory, not bad muscle memory, within that 2 seconds. If I do that and I'm good, cool, then I'll get to work and I'll try to shorten that up. If I don't do it there, then I'll go ahead and take a moment and try to figure out, okay, well, how do I get it faster? And try to diagnose what went wrong. Maybe I didn't clear the shirt fast enough. Maybe I got a bad grip and had to readjust. A number of things can happen there, but you've got a measurable amount of time of what it took for you to get to that point. And then I'll go from measuring to that benchmark of where I'm at, and then I'll kind of slow it down, go through the motions slowly, then I'll start picking up the pace, and then I'll start pushing it towards the end to try to go beyond what I know I can do. If you think about it, it's kind of like weightlifting or something like that, where you're going to attack on a little bit more weight than what you think you can do. In this case, I'm adding a little bit more speed than what I think I can do to try to get my muscles to react faster and to develop that technique that I need to. And then I'll end with a couple of other time tests, or maybe in part of my drills, I'll run them with a shorter part time to try to push and get that extra pressure to try to get that time that I need to get. And that's it. And that's my session. Another session, and there's a bunch of different dry fire drills that you can do, but again, it's with something in mind, right? Maybe I'm going to work on transition. So I'm going to put a couple targets up, and I'm going to work on transitioning from one target to the other, making sure my eyes move first and then my gun follows, those kinds of things. One of the most simple drills that I encourage beginners to start with is, and I've got a link to it on my blog that I can share with you later, but Lynn Givens, she's the wife of Tom Givens, who owns Rangemaster. I know them as Rangemasters. They've actually got 4 words in their school name, and I'm going to mess it up here if I say it, but awesome dude, Tom. I've taken one class from him. It was a 2-day class and just learned a bunch. And his wife, Lynn, developed a drill that's called the visual trigger press drill. And it's, as the name implies, what you end up doing is you pull out the firearm, you get it in your hand again, make sure that it's clear. You rack the slide to make sure the trigger is charged. You turn it on its side, and you're going to watch your finger as it comes in contact with the trigger. You're going to watch how far it needs to move before it hits the wall. Then you're going to watch as it breaks. Then as before you let go of the trigger, you're going to rack it again, get that gun back on the side where you can see your finger, and you're going to slowly release it so you can see where the trigger reset is. And you're going to repeat the process. And the goal of that drill, well, it's like, oh, you're not doing anything super cool or tactical or defensive with it. You're not pushing time. No, it's about becoming intimately familiar with the trigger.
Yeah.
Not because that's how you're going to shoot it, but because you want to know what those points are so that your muscle, and this helps build your muscle memory really quickly. Because since you're watching it, you're getting multiple stimulus. You're feeling it, you're seeing it, and you're hearing the clicks in those particular spots. And you just do that over and over and over several times for a couple minutes to get familiar with it. In no joke, go to the shooting range, run a couple of drills there to see how fast you move and how far your shots spread out under pressure, that kind of thing. Go home, do that drill, and just kind of watch that and do that for a couple of days, and go back to the range and do it again. All of a sudden, your groups get a lot tighter and you're shooting faster. Why?
That's awesome.
Because your muscle memory on that trigger has gotten better. But that's dry fire. Then we talked about live fire, and live fire is very much the same way. It's about, go to the range, don't just put holes on paper, have a goal in mind, right? And look up different drills that you can do to help you achieve that goal, and figure out what you're going to do make every shot count, especially when the ammunition is so hard to come by and so expensive right now. I love mag dumps as much as the next person. It's fun to shoot fast and just to shoot for the heck of it, just for fun in a safe manner. But right now I want every single bullet that I send out range to have value to me and me getting better. So have a plan in mind, go out and do that. Again, the more frequent, the better. 100 rounds is good. 200 is good too. Anywhere in that range, you're good. A little less than that, I think you're losing some value because it's not really enough for you to build anything with it. Anything more than that, and I think it's also wasteful because you can only absorb so much.
Yeah, good point. Valid point. Yeah, mind blown, because I didn't even think about, I've heard of dry firing, but, I always thought about I have to learn all this stuff at the range. And now you just blew my mind, because it's like, no, I can practice a lot of this stuff, except obviously the firing part here at home, and, the safety of my own house. So I'm going to look into that for sure. A lot of those drills, those dry fire drills.
Yep. I can put you a couple good books too that'll help you get started on that. And for your audience, if anybody wants to know, Ben Stoger, who's a really, really just top shooter, competitive shooter. He knows his stuff really well. He's also an instructor, and he's got a couple books on it, but he's got a book called Dry Fire Reloaded. And it's got a bunch of drills that'll help with those different things that we kind of talked about. And the thing to keep in mind about dry fire is every single fundamental skill that you need to develop as a shooter. We're talking about technical skills here, mechanical skills, not necessarily tactical and all those things that are there. But where your eyes go, where your hand movements go, how to press a trigger, how to get a good grip. Every single one of those things you can do at home. The only thing you can't do is you can't learn recoil management. Right. And that's why you go shoot live, because you need that recoil for you to develop the recoil management skills that you need in conjunction to the other fundamental skills that you had. And the three main ones that you need to focus on for pistol shooting is going to be your grip. That's going to be your foundation. You have a bad grip, you're going to have a bad day. Your trigger control. Again, if you're slapping that trigger and you're jerking that thing around, the holes aren't going to go where you want them to go. And the last one's going to be your sight picture and your sight alignment. So if you're pointing it at the right place, you're making sure those things don't move, your trigger isn't disturbing the sights, and you've got a good grip on that, you're going to shoot good. And that's what you want to focus on.
Gotcha. So back before we leave the area of speed and all these dry exercises. So I guess the question I would ask is, because I know this is it's a personal thing. Carrying, is it abdominal carry, behind the back carry? What's your take on carry, or where to carry? Because I think that would have to do with speed, I'm assuming, right?
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah. So if we're talking about the fastest and all the hotness that everybody's doing, it's going to be appendix carry.
Okay.
That's where it's at. It's when you look at it from a competitive perspective and also the training that I received and what these guys are doing, you're going to be about a quarter second faster coming out of the appendix, and you're going to be strong side, right? Strong side, so that's between your 230 to 330 position, maybe all the way back to 4 o'clock position on your dominant side. Small of the back is going to be slower.
Okay.
And now you're also getting into potentially a dangerous thing to do because you've got a very hard object that's very close to your spine. And, one of the things that we think about from a defensive situation is that it's called a gun fight. So you can fall, you can do different things before you even get that gun out. Now, even if you're not in a fight, but you're walking down the street and you slip and fall, and all of a sudden you've got a hard object impacting your spine, that's going to be a bad day. Yeah. So I try to keep that gun away from the back. Me personally, I carry on my strong side. And the reason for that is, even though I know appendix is faster, is I haven't quite figured out how to carry appendix comfortably in a way that I can conceal the gun that I want to conceal, right? So there's a little bit of compromise that I'm doing as far as comfort, capability, concealability there.
Yeah. I've tried it in the back before to give my take, and I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't even think about that. But what I was thinking is and I told my wife this: if I'm gonna go reach for this thing in the back, and behind me, and I put my hands behind my back, that's gonna leave me open to get punched right in the fucking face.
That too.
Or potentially get stabbed, right? Like I have both arms behind my back, and here this person may be coming charging at me, maybe coming, and I just thought it was a no-no. Now, I used to be, a heavy set guy. I lost a ton of weight, but the appendix carry is tough for me because I'm an under the belly pant wearer, right? So I bought this thing, and I feel kind of weird because I feel like those girls in Miami trying to get ready for the summer. But I got this pretty much like a corset thing that kind of holds a few magazines and holds the thing, and that's been working out for me. But I struggle with appendix as well. It's I guess my point for that whole thing.
Yeah, holster is going to matter a lot.
Yeah.
A good quality holster is going to help a lot with those decisions. And from that perspective, I've used a bunch of different holsters. Given what I've learned and where I'm at, this is one of those things where I tend to lean towards safety and capability the most. I want something that's going to be secure. I want something I can get to quickly, and something that's going to that I don't have to fight with to make sure that I can holster my gun safely and unholster it safely without accidentally shooting myself,
Right.
for lack of a better term, because that would be a bad day, right? So, full Kydex all the way around, it's going to be a lot less comfortable than leather. Not a lot less, it's going to be less comfortable than leather, but I'll gladly give up that comfort for the security of a good quality Kydex holster that'll retain my firearm properly and protect it from those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, get the right holster, get the right attachments on it, tweak it to where it fits you just right, and then go for it. But the most important thing here is carry your gun, man. Comfort is a huge topic that I hear often. If it's comfort has its value in the sense that if it's so uncomfortable that you're going to take it off and you're not going to have it with you, what's the point?
Right.
Figure out a way to do it comfortable enough. Now, I err towards, I'd like to carry a bigger gun because I want to have more capability, larger capacity. I want to be able to shoot it well, and larger handguns are a lot easier to be proficient with and to shoot better than a much smaller handgun. So I carry a heavier firearm, and because of that, that's kind of where I've limited my carry to strong side, because I can conceal it well, I can carry it well there, I can draw it well, and I've balanced comfort to where I can live with it and make sure that I'm not leaving it at home or taking it off and
right.
not having it with me when it turns out that that's when I need it.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's definitely a trial and everything. I'm trying to figure that out. I want to bring back something that you brought up earlier, that that stopping power was a myth. I want to talk about that, and then that can naturally lead into the different platforms of weapons and use cases for those weapons. But let's talk about the stopping power before that. You said it's a myth.
Yeah.
Why is that a myth?
Well, I mean, when we're talking about pistols,
yep.
And I think Clint Smith probably put it best, and I'm going to try to paraphrase what he said, but pistols are for putting holes in people, rifles are for putting holes through people, and shotguns with the right load will take a chunk out of a person. So, when it comes to a pistol, they're underpowered rounds, right? As it is. So the difference between the amount of damage that a 45 ACP or a 40 Smith & Wesson will cause versus a 9mm is negligible. Yes, it's going to be a bigger hole, but again, we'll talk about that in a second. It's about where you put the hole that matters, not how big the hole is. What really put this into perspective, I'm going to go back to Tom Givens here from a class that I took with him. I'd always been told, or maybe not told, but I think I saw a couple of YouTube videos, and again, that's where you go do your research right when you're brand new and you get so much of this bad information. But I saw people kind of holding hot dogs behind the back of a gun, and then they shot a 9mm, and the cycle slided and just tore up that hot dog. Like, yeah, don't put your thumb there because it's going to destroy your thumb. Look what it did to the hot dog. Well, Tom, to get the point across that it was an underpowered round, he was like, watch this. And he put his thumb right behind the back of the slide, pulled the trigger, and his thumb was perfectly fine. The slide didn't move. He just caused a malfunction. Right? He's like, yeah, it's physics, guys. It's a small hole. You're drilling a small hole into a person. That's really what's going to matter. It's just going to matter where you're going to put the hole, not the stopping power behind a pistol round. It's just not there. Right now, once we start talking in the rifles, that's a different discussion altogether. But when it comes to a pistol, it matters where you put it. Now, when it comes to self-defense, there's two ways that you're going to stop a person from doing things you don't want them to do, like kill you, rape you, rob you, whatever the case might be. One is a psychological stop. Right. And when we hear about self-defense, this is why a lot of self-defense uses go unreported. You draw that firearm psychologically, like, oh, I don't want any of that smoke. Right. And all of a sudden they stop, they turn around, they go away. Another way is maybe they keep going because they don't think that you're actually going to do it, and you put a hole in them. But it's not a lethal hole or a mortal hole, and they're going to start bleeding. They're going to feel the pain. They're going to be like, oh no, this guy was serious. I'm done. I'm going to walk away. Yeah. And then you get the last group of people, a potential attacker who's so determined that he doesn't care how many holes you put on him. He's going to keep going as long as he can, as long as he's still breathing or he's still conscious. Right. So now in this point, you got two ways to shut that down. Well, at the end of the day, this is what we call a physiological stop. That means you've got to cause enough damage to that person physically so that he can no longer willfully or consciously continue to attack you. And there's going to be, at the end of the day, it's cutting off oxygen supply to the brain, right? It's going to be rendering them unconscious. The fastest way to do that, well, the other way to do that is to actually shut off the central nervous system. So that's going to be a bullet to the head or one that hits the spinal cord and causes enough nerve damage there to shut the person down to where they're not physically able to do that. That's the fastest way to do it. Okay. The other way to do that is to put a hole in a vital organ, such as the lungs or the heart, so that it causes so much bleeding so quickly that he loses the amount of oxygen that's flowing to the brain. I'm using the word he, but basically whoever the attacker is. Sure. I'm not trying to stereotype here.
Not trying to get canceled here. I got you.
No, but at the end of the day, you're that person's going to become unconscious because the lack of oxygen supply to the brain due to severe bleeding, and that's what's going to cause a stop, right? So that's what it comes down to. And again, the difference between the rounds that we just talked about is really irrelevant. So you do want a pistol round that's going to be that's going to penetrate deep enough to hit those vital organs, to hit the spinal cord, to go through the skull into the brain, if that's the way that you need to go with it. And 9mm does that. So does 45. So does 40. So does I think the smallest round that professional instructors in the industry will tell you will be a 380 ACP, which is also called a 9mm short in some circles. But that's about it. Those are, if you look at all the research that's been done on that, those are the pistol cartridges that have shown to actually go deep enough to cause that lethal damage that's necessary to stop the threat, right? To end the threat that's present in front of you.
Gotcha.
You can do that with even 22s have been. I'm talking about 22 long rifles, the little rimfire cartridges have been talked about as being the most lethal cartridge because those things have killed more people in self-defense encounters than any other firearms. But I think that's the evidence suggests that that's a result of how prolific the cartridge is. There's a lot more people that have 22 handguns or 22 rifles than any other firearm. And so therefore there's a lot more of them used in self-defense situations, and therefore there's a larger number of people who have succumbed to wounds from a 22 because of that. Not necessarily because it was more effective, it's just the nature of higher density populations and statistics causing those numbers to rise.
Sure. And now can we get, since we're talking about the different types of ammunitions, can we get into the platform? So when would somebody need a rifle, which by the way, I can't get here in Massachusetts. Well, I can't get an AR. I could get other rifles. Or a shotgun. When would somebody be venturing into those areas, and for what reasons should they be venturing there?
Yeah. So if we keep it to the context of self-defense, I think going back to what Clint said here is, your AR-15, one of the reasons it's so popular, you're going to have a much more effective round, especially with the 223 ammunition and the right rounds. It's going to be frangible. Using a frangible round, it's going to break up once it comes in contact with walls and those kinds of things. So, it's not going to over penetrate as much as people think it does. In fact, it's very, between that and the 9mm, you're still going to have penetration issues. At the end of the day, you got to hit your target.
Yep.
But a 223 is going to do more damage quicker because of the amount of energy that it carries. And so this is now where stopping power actually does come into play into the threat that's in front of you. So the other thing where an AR or a carbine type platform comes in is that it's significantly easier to learn to shoot well.
Interesting.
The thing about pistols is they're actually probably the most difficult firearm to be proficient with and to shoot accurately and precisely because of how small it is, how many points of contact you have with it, how short the sight radius is on it. It's not actually a very precise weapon. The reason it's so popular is because it's highly portable. It's easy to conceal. It's easy to carry on you. If I could, I would carry an AR with me everywhere that I go. But trying to stuff one of those down my pants and draw it quickly is going to become a problem,
sure.
when it comes to concealed carry. So that's, so for me, when people say, hey, I'm really interested in home defense, I generally steer them towards an AR first for those reasons. It's going to work. It's going to be easier to learn. It's going to be easier to shoot. It's going to be easier to shoot well. Right. And so I'm looking for the easiest learning curve for somebody to become proficient with. You still have to practice with it. It's not a magic weapon here, but it's going to be much more effective than the handgun, much easier to learn than a handgun is. The shotgun, I think, one of the places where this comes really into play and becomes a really viable option is for folks who are in situations like yours where you just can't get an AR. Well, same thing, going back to what I said earlier, the right load, a shotgun's going to take a chunk out of a person, right? You're shooting a bunch of pellets at somebody. In fact, if you're using 00 buckshots, basically hitting them with 8 or 9 or 7, depending on the load, 30 caliber projectiles at the same time. You put that in the right place, it's going to do a lot of damage real quick with one trigger pull. But it comes with another set of drawbacks. And for me, this kind of comes again into usability and learning curve and also capacity and whatnot. So from a usability perspective, the shotgun just has a whole bunch of myths surrounding it. You hear people say, well, the sound of a racking shotgun is all that you're going to need, or it's not going to over penetrate like a rifle will or a pistol will, or you don't even really have to aim it because the shot's spread out. So maybe you can even take out multiple attackers at the same time with one shot. All is a bunch of garbage. All of that is a bunch of garbage. Yeah. You still have to aim it. When we're talking at home defense distances, those multiple projectiles aren't going to spread enough to hit multiple targets. In fact, you don't want them to, because if you think about it, if it's spread enough to where it goes, a couple go into one target and the rest of it don't, well, where do those other ones go? They're going to hit the wall or they're going to hit somebody else. And that whole penetration thing, it's going to go through your wall if you're using the right load. And then you get people arguing, well, you use birdshot. Well, okay. Well, now you get into the thing that I was talking about earlier, which is you need the projectile to go far enough into the attack that actually physically stops them from doing that. Birdshot may not do that, right? Because now you're hitting them with BBs instead of big old balls of lead.
Yeah.
So all of that right there that I'm talking about is that there's a lot more to learn and to consider when it comes to a shotgun. So it requires and that's part of the difficulty of the learning curve, is that there's so many variables that go into the right load selection for the shotgun to be able to do that, and understanding how the shotgun patterns. So talked about spread. And that means the number of pellets that are in the shot when it's fired. It's how big of an area are they going to impact at different distances. The further you go out, the pattern's going to get wider. As it gets wider, that means you also have more space between where those points of impact are going to be, which means you might also are less likely to be precise with it and get that bullet exactly where you need to go. If you're in a home defense situation and you've got somebody far enough to where that spread is going to be larger than the head, and you have to make a headshot and they're holding a loved one hostage, what are you going to do? You might be taking 2 heads down instead of 1, and one that you don't want to take down with you, right? So those are all things that make the shotgun a lot more difficult to understand and become proficient with, so that you can use it well in that type of situation. And all of the myth that surrounds that, I think, keeps people complacent with not getting better with it, because they're like, oh, everybody says it's so easy, it's so magical. No, it's not. It's difficult, it's complex. When then we also get into the recoil associated with a shotgun. An AR-15, one of the reasons why it's so easy to learn is because it doesn't recoil much. You can shoot 1 round, you're going to feel it. Yes, it's going to recoil and the muzzle's going to rise a little bit, but you're going to get back on target quickly. And it doesn't take a lot of physical strength to control it. A 12 gauge shotgun, on the other hand, it's not the same story. And then you'll get arguments with, oh, well, use a smaller caliber, go down to a 16 gauge or a 20 gauge. And well, okay, but now you're losing shooting power and penetration or number of pellets. You're compromising in other areas to do that. So again, just a lot of variables there, but it is used properly in proficient hands. It's an excellent tool. And I do think that in situations like yours, where you can't get your hands on an AR, my advice would be, can you get a shotgun? Yep. Okay, cool. Get one and go learn how to use it.
For sure. Yeah. Those are awesome, valid points. And it seems like all the arguments for a shotgun seem to be to downgrade it. Hey, well, you could just do this. And it's like, well, now you have less of a weapon.
And I want to be clear about this. I'm not trying to get down on the shotgun as it's a bad tool.
I understand.
Every single one of these things that we're talking about is you have to understand what its strengths and what its limitations are. Right. And if you understand that and you apply that knowledge with the right level of proficiency, it's going to work. So I have zero problems with shotguns. It's just all the myth that goes around it. You've got Biden's just buy a shotgun and shoot 2 rounds into the air song. I don't know if you've seen that one going around YouTube. I'll have to send it your way. It's hilarious. But
that sounds hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I mean, with the tool analogy that you're saying is basically like, hey, you have a nail here. Don't get a wrench. Go get the hammer. Like you need the right tool for the job that's at hand here.
That's exactly right. And again, going with that analogy, can you actually hammer a nail with a wrench?
Boom.
Yes, you can.
But it's not effective.
It might be effective enough, but you could have been a lot more effective and a lot more efficient had you gotten the right tool for the job.
Right. I'd probably lose a finger, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right, to the point where the shotgun, somebody might lose their finger using it too. Right now, I don't, but yeah.
For sure. No, the perfect example was what you gave with the loved one being, right there with the person. It's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to just shoot them both? It's not going to be a good idea. All right. Listen, my average person that listens to this show is probably scared as fuck right now if they're not already a gun owner, right? So I want to reverse the whole conversation because we've gone deep and I love that. And I want to know, what do you tell the people that are just flat out scared? Because what I've tried to tell people is my introduction to, let's say, the gun community, just because I don't have a better term for it right now, is there's a lot of myths and stigmas that go with it, because this is one of the, if not the safest community that I have ever had the luxury of being a part of. I mean, everybody is super laser focused on safety first. This is what you do. And I don't think the average person understands that. Can you dig into that a little bit if you agree?
Yeah, I completely agree. The community definitely comes together. Everybody's looking to be safe. Everybody understands that there's a huge responsibility that comes with gun ownership. And I think to a lot of people on the outside who aren't gun owners looking in, that can be very, very scary. Because like, oh man, that tool's, it just, again, all the stigmas that come with it. You're buying a tool that's designed to kill. You're buying a tool that's designed to punch holes at long distances.
Right.
That can be used to kill. And there's so many other things that can be used to kill as well too. But to set that aside for a second, and if you can, just kind of look at it and picture a young kid who's about to go swimming for the first time. They're typically scared of the pool, sometimes scared of the water. And once they go in and realize that, oh, this isn't so bad, this is actually kind of nice, that's what it's kind of like to fire a gun and shoot a gun for the first time. And I'm going to use the same analogy. Is somebody going into a pool or going swimming perfectly safe? No, there's dangers associated with that as well too. You know, people drown in pools, people get hurt, and those kinds of things. So you're going to learn to be safe around the things that you're doing. So my advice to those folks who are just maybe on the fence or just really, really scared about the whole process, find somebody you trust to take you to the range. And again, swimming pool analogy, find somebody you trust to take you swimming for the first time.
Yeah.
Find somebody who's gonna make you comfortable, because that's, and if you don't have anybody at all, find an instructor, reach out to your local gun range, and find out. You'd be surprised at how many people are willing to help you do that safely for the first time. That's one of these things that the community is great about. And I can guarantee, I've yet to meet somebody who took me up on an offer of me taking them to the range who was like, oh my God, I never want to do that again. I think every single person that I can think of is like, oh, can we do this again next weekend? Is usually the response that I get, because it is a very empowering experience. People tend to leave with a smile. The exception here would be folks who are hearing sensitive, because it is a loud experience.
Yeah.
And again, taking proper precautions to protect your hearing, as well as you know, again, being safe and practicing good safety, you can have a very comfortable and good experience done correct, you know, given the right setting with the right people around you to take you there. And that's what this community is all about, is helping people get started with that and to learning and to level up their game. And again, there's so many aspects of this that we didn't touch. And I talked about how I got into hunting, and then there's competitive shooting. And, you know, one of the funnest things just recreationally that I found to do is, you know, going out to somewhere where it's legal to shoot, maybe it's public land or whatnot, finding a good spot to just take out a small 22 caliber gun, because they don't recoil at all. They're very fun to learn with and just fun to shoot. Taking a bunch of cheese balls, putting them out in the field and trying to hit them with a 22 and just watching them disappear in a puff when you do actually hit them. It's a very rewarding experience. It's a lot of fun. And it's something that you can do safely with family members and friends and have a good time just doing something like that. Again, I would equate this to, not everybody who goes swimming because they want to be Olympic swimmers, or they want to be deep sea divers, or anything crazy like that. A lot of people just want to go to the pool to wade in it and have fun. You can do the same thing with firearms, and you can do it safely and responsibly and have a good time.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And like you said, the welcoming of the help in the community too. I mean, I haven't had, you know, somebody personally help me, but I know the people at the range a few times have gone are willing to help. And I have seen a few individuals that have gotten help that have been next to me in the different lanes or whatever. So yeah, I think I don't want to use the word marketing because it sounds corny, but you know, I think the gun community is just better marketing in that. Because I think, especially here in a state like Massachusetts, I don't think that example is out front and forward. You have to be interested or actually in the gun community to notice how generous everybody is and the safety that everybody always seems to, you know, remind and strive upon. And the no division, right? Like there's, you know, the black dudes, there's the white dudes, there's me, the Puerto Rican dude, and everybody knows that they're there for the same reason, part of the same clique, if that makes any sense. And it's really, I wish more people would know about that part of the gun community, but
yeah.
It's tough,
it's
man.
a very inclusive community for sure.
Yeah.
You know, everybody's welcome. You know, I was going to say something that was going to sound smart and intelligent and deep here, and I just lost my train of thought. Love it when that happens.
No, it's all good because you've been killing it with the intelligent stuff already. So I just to weave in there. So since we're on the safety thing, this is something that I've gotten better with, and now I've figured out what I want to do. I don't want to keep doxing everything I do, but the new gun owners, when it comes to keeping one in the chamber and not, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, keep one in the chamber.
Yeah, that seems to be something that a few of me, when I started, and a few newbies around me seem to struggle with.
Oh, everybody does, especially when they're new. I did. You know, I remember. So when I got my concealed carry permit the first time, I went on some forums and kind of looked to see what people were doing, where they went. And it was funny because in the Texas handgun concealed carry, there's like a Texas CHL forum. I don't know if it's hosted. I don't even know if it's still around. I haven't been there forever, but everybody talks about the first time that they do their walk in Wally World with their firearm, right? And that Wally World being Walmart.
Walmart.
And it's crazy because you're carrying concealed, and at the time there was all the printing laws. So if your shirt got on it the wrong way and it printed, that could be considered brandishing, and you could catch a misdemeanor for that. And so you've got all these things kind of making you nervous about it, and you think everybody's looking and everybody knows, but the reality is nobody does.
Right.
Nobody's going to notice, and that's something that you're going to have to get over. The other part about carrying one in the chamber is, again, you're kind of thinking, well, I don't want this thing to go off all by itself, and there's definitely a concern, sometimes a fear that people have into it. I certainly had it, but the thing that you've got to keep in mind is that gun is not going to go off unless something pulls the trigger, right? So you've got mechanical safeties, active safeties, drop safeties, passive safeties. All these things are in there. So as long as you've got a good holster that's going to hold that firearm, that's what made a big deal about the holster. It's not going to go anywhere. And at some point, I'm not going to tell everybody that just do that or shame on you for not carrying one in the chamber. Again, you got to figure out what's good for you and what's going to work for you. And if that means that, you'd rather not carry than carry one in the chamber, well, I'd rather you carry without one in the chamber than not carry at all. So figure out what works for you. But I do urge you to get to the point to carrying one in the chamber. And that comes from the training and the statistics that the training that I've had and the statistics that I've learned about through the training and the education that I've had is that every fraction of a second is going to make a difference. The most important shot that you're going to need to make is going to be the very first shot. Statistically speaking, in a gunfight, the person who gets the first good shot, meaning they hit the other person with a bullet, is going to be the likely winner of that fight. Right. So if you've got somebody else who's pulled a gun on you, they've already got the drop on you, they're ahead of you, you can't spare fractions of a second. You need to get that gun up in the fight as quickly as possible, and you're probably going to be moving to get off the X so that if the other person does shoot first, they miss you, and you're going to need to make that first shot. So even if it's just the motion of racking the slide, even if that only adds 0.1 seconds, that's 0.1 seconds that's taken away from you getting the job that you need to do done to save your life or to save the life of a loved one. So people carry with one in the chamber all the time. I do. I've done it for years. It's never gone off on me. I can't think of a time when that's actually happened unless somebody was negligent or had a bad holster. Something else happened to pull the trigger. You're going to be fine. Train with it, get proficient with it, get comfortable with it, and make it part of your lifestyle is what I urge people to do.
Yeah, I've started to do so since that notion there, where I'm like, well, nothing is gonna. Somebody told me the same thing, which is like nothing. This is not like a grenade that's live inside of your waist or whatever. That trigger needs to go back, and that whole mechanism needs to go in order for this thing to go off. And with that in my mind, it's helped me a ton. And of course, finger discipline, right? Like it's pulling it out of the holster, putting it in the holster. Finger discipline. If your finger is not on the trigger, then you're likely not going to get that shut off.
Yep, and watch them shirts, man. All you need is a shirt or a string from, like, say, like a hoodie or one of the drawstrings that are in there to get into that holster. When you're trying to put that in, all of a sudden you start feeling a snag. Just stop, pull that gun back out, move whatever you need to do, and just look at that. Look at that gun as you put it in slowly, smoothly until it clicks into retention. I can't remember where I heard it, but I'm not smart enough to come up with this on my own. But nobody's ever won a gunfight by being faster to reholster.
Interesting.
The fight's already over. You're walking away. So don't shoot yourself. It's part of that process, right? There's no reason to reholster quickly. Reholstering carefully is key. And as long as you've done that and you're holstered carefully and that gun's in a good holster and it's not going to move, it's not going to go off.
Yeah, awesome. That's good to know. Yeah, I didn't even think about the string on the pants or whatever. That'll be a shitty day, like you said. Definitely. Yep. Yeah. So just quickly, if you could just name favorite weapons that you've ever had or that you currently have, hit me.
It's going to be what I've now gotten into Wow, no, there's so many of them, man. It's such a hard thing. So from a defensive perspective, I'm completely in love with the H&K VP9 with my Trigicon RMR on it. That's what I carry every day. I've been shooting it now for a couple of years. I've shot it competitively as well too, and that gun just runs and it fits my hand perfectly. And I have, it's actually the first handgun that I've picked up that I now have more than one of, because I wanted to have extras and backups around and that kind of thing. So I just absolutely love it. Big fan of my AR. It's a Daniel Defense, was DDM4. I think it's a V7 or a V11. I don't remember what version of it is. Had it for years. I've trained with it, ran with it. I shoot that as often as I can. It's just a fun gun to shoot, and it's what I've got set up for my home defense rifle.
Awesome.
Short of that, we get into some of the guns that I have access to that are just for fun. Well, no, there's my hunting rifle. I do love my hunting rifle too. But for fun guns, I have a thing for recoil. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know what you want to call it, but I love shooting my 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum revolver.
Okay.
It is a beast of recoil.
Sounds like a monster.
It is a monster, man. And honestly, not a gun to learn on. Work up to it. It will hurt you if you don't know what you're doing with it. But there is something about when you've developed the skill to manage that recoil and you feel that explosion in your hands as that thing goes, as you light that primer and that projectile starts leaving the gun and that muzzle just rises and it shakes your hand and your arm. It puts a smile on my face that I just can't explain. It's not for everybody. Some people are like, "Oh, forget that. Didn't that hurt your hand?" I'm like, "Yeah, it hurt my hand, and I love it."
Yeah.
Other people are like, "Yeah, no thanks."
And
that's cool too. Yep.
Yeah.
You know, we've each got our own things, and then of course I've got my 1 mile rifle, right? Where I'm right now, I'm working towards being able to hit a target at 1 mile out. It's still on my bucket list. Haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
But it is, a rifle that is fun to shoot for different reasons. So I guess as a whole, man, I love firearms. I've yet to really come across one where I'm like, nah, I hate, except my first one. And I don't hate it. It just, I don't see much utility in it anymore. It's not a recreational gun. It's an okay defensive firearm. Will it work? Yeah, it absolutely will. If I wasn't blessed with where I'm at in life today, where I can afford to have multiple firearms, I'd be perfectly okay with it. And same thing, we were talking about Tauruses earlier today. If that's what you got and that's what you can afford, I'm not gonna get down on you over that and bust your chops, because yes, Taurus does have a reputation for being a value price weapon that has had some reliability issues and some quality control issues. But if that's what you got, that's what you got. And as long as you're training with it and you're proficient with it and you know what to do, I've said this to a bunch of guys when they're busting people up. It's, I'd rather take a person who is proficient with a really crappy firearm to be part of my team, whether we're shooting competitively or it's somebody who I'm going to be, God forbid we get in a gunfight and we have to get multiple guns into the game. I'd rather have him by my side or that person by my side than somebody who's got an ultra cool, super Gucci gun and they don't know what to do with it.
Right. I agree. Yeah. I
And
did like the
don't get me
Taurus.
wrong.
It was a smooth shot.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It was a really good shot. And I've heard that the company has been under new management, whatever. It doesn't matter. I agree with you though. That's an awesome point. Yeah. I think naturally I would have to ask this, and answer as deep as you want or not as you want, because I don't feel it's a political question. But for people who don't understand the power of the Second Amendment and why they should care or why they should fight for it, do you have any thoughts on that? Because most people that grew up in states like me are just like, why do we need that, right? I mean, obviously, I've changed my term, but.
Well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer.
Sure.
And we can get into the politics behind it and why it was phrased the way that it is.
Yeah.
But, I think the essence for me is, I'll put it another way. This will be a fun story. Actually, I was traveling for work. I was outside the U.S. I was in Southeast Asia for a little while. And while I was out there, I met a gentleman from England. super cool guy. We had some great conversations. We got into talking. He found out I was from Texas. He asked me if I owned guns, and I said, hell yes. And, you know, and he didn't quite understand everything that was there, but he was very pleasant about it and just wanted to really understand. So he asked me a question. He's like, you know, I just really need to know, what would it take for you to give up your firearms? And I was like, well, there's a lot to this, and I don't think that my answer would be there's one thing that would happen. But if I was going to consider it, it's we would have to eradicate evil, and we would have to make sure that no other firearms existed in this planet or this reality. Right. And the reality is what I'm really talking about is changing the human condition.
Right.
Every single person has the capacity for good and evil. Some people decide to act on the evil side. Some people decide to act on the good side. But yeah, that's all of us, man. None of us are perfect. And you put enough stress, enough duress on a person to commit evil acts that they've maybe justified in their mind as being morally necessary to their situation. You know, let's talk about a home invasion. In my mind, there's going to be some people who are like, look, I need to feed my kids. I'm out of options. I know this person has means. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to go ahead and get what I need. And if they get in my way, I'm going to kill them. Right? They've justified it in their head because they're just trying to survive.
Right.
And you can't get rid of that, right? So what the Second Amendment does is it gives the average person it protects the right of the average person to own the tools necessary to protect themselves from evil. There's other things you can do with it. You can hunt, you can do all these fun things that we talked about, but that's the essence to me of that Second Amendment. And if we were to give that up as a nation, that's exactly what us as a people have lost, is the protection of that right. It now becomes a privilege, a heavily regulated one, a heavily scrutinized one. And when you put people in power, again, human condition, people in power will continue to seek and grow their power, to maintain and grow their power, right? So that means that they're willing to infringe on other rights, to do whatever they need to keep their lifestyle and their situation for the people that they care about. And that's wrong. And yeah, then you'll get people like, well, are you suggesting that Americans would be able to fight off a tyrannical government in the U.S. and the military, and they have tanks and drones and all this? I'm like, no, I'm not saying that we would. I don't know that we'd have a chance, but we definitely have a better chance with the Second Amendment than we do without it.
Absolutely, yeah. It would go from a fight to just a walkover if you didn't have. Yeah,
and that's it, man. It'd go from a fight to a massacre, is what it would go from.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right. So, or maybe it goes from massacre to, I don't know what would be worse than a massacre, but
yeah,
that to me is the essence behind it. So anybody who says, hey, we need to get rid of this because for whatever reason, I think you need to realize that what you're saying is that you're willing to not have any rights, that you're willing to be a slave, maybe not in the traditional sense in terms of ownership, but your well-being is going to be at the whim of others, not at under your control. That's what you're giving up.
Right. And it doesn't take a genius to see that historically the side that has the more gunpowder usually wins.
Yeah, well, and I'm not big on history, man. I'm just kind of following logic and
yeah.
Say I'm more of a logical person as far as that goes, and that's the way that I see it, man. I've seen good people do bad things, right?
Yeah.
Because of the situations that they're in. I'm no angel either, man. I've had my struggles, and there's definitely times when those things have crossed my mind. Thankfully, that's not the case anymore, but that's just it.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line for me.
That's the best answer I've gotten on that for sure. I appreciate that, and I respect that answer a lot. Zoe, in respects to your time, brother, please let the listeners know about the blog, what they can get in the blog, and anywhere else you want to send them. I don't know if you want to send them to your Twitter. This is just moment, man.
Yeah, the easiest one's going to be the blogs. That's the easiest one to remember. Just Uncle Zoe. So UNCLEZO.com. Basically, my whole journey over the last couple of years that I've been documenting is there. My thoughts and decisions on a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. What's good for home defense today? Heck, how much ammo should I have right now given the current ammo crisis? How can I get better? I need a dry fire drill, or I'm looking for this. All of that's there. From there, there's links on every single page to hit me up on. I think I've got the Twitter's going to be the easiest one if you want to hit me up on social media. I'm on there the most, but I've got links to Facebook page, a YouTube channel that's got a bunch of really bad videos. If you want to go to that, I'm not a videographer, man. I'm not a very creative person at all. So at least visually creative person from that perspective. My artistic skills are non-existent. And then I've got a link to the Instagram as well too, and any of those will work. And even on my blog, there's at the very bottom of every page, there's a contact Uncle Zoe link. You click on that, you send me an email. I'll try to help you as much as I can. And again, my whole goal here, man, is what you talked about, is to try to be more inclusive of people who are curious about it and want to give it a try and want to learn and begin that journey. I hope I'm doing a good job. A lot of people have told me that I'm doing a good job, so I think that I am. But that's just it, man. That's my goal. And if I can help one person, then I'm happy, and that's all that I can ask for.
Yeah, no, you're killing it in that end, man. You're definitely helping me out. I'm sure you're helping our listeners out. I applaud everything you're doing. Like I said in the beginning of this podcast, not blowing smoke up your ass. You just have a really clean, concise, and straight to the point messaging with everything that you do. And I respect that. Please keep it up, man. Hopefully I can have you back on the podcast and some different frequencies. We could talk more about this stuff, because I think my audience would definitely love this information. Yeah. And it's important, especially through the journey that I've gone through when it comes to defense, man. I appreciate your time, Zoe.
It's been a great conversation, man. I'd be happy to be back if you want to have me back on. I'm going to leave with one last piece of advice for anybody who begins on this journey. Question everything. Don't take anything that you hear at face value. Ask why, and think critically about the responses that you're getting, so that you can make your own informed opinion and decision about what you're going to do. This is just, your situation is unique. Your situation's not mine. You are you, and I'm me. So take all of that in. What works for me may not work for the next person. There's things that work better than others, but just think critically, take that in, because this is important decisions that you're making. And some of these are financially impactful. Getting into this lifestyle is not a cheap endeavor, right? There's places to be frugal on. There's places where you can't afford to. Again, I think it's a valuable one to get into. And based on your budget, you're going to be able to do that. But the worst thing that you can do in this process that will make you make mistakes, whether they're financial ones, perhaps even safety ones, is just take something at face value and not ask why.
Right. Solid point.
Even if you heard it from me, man, if anytime I say something, you're like, well, what did you just say? Why? Challenge me on it, because I don't have all the answers, and sometimes I need to be challenged too, and that helps me learn too. Yeah,
and I think that should be applauded in different areas, not just in this context. But yeah, I agree, man. I think in Bitcoin they call it trust. Don't trust, verify is the whole concept behind that thing. So so once again, man, I appreciate you, brother. This episode will air soon, and I'm excited because I really think my audience needs this type of information, man. So thanks a lot, man. Appreciate you.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
All right, brother. That wraps up another great conversation. It's one that if you've never thought about before, you should definitely open your mind up to, because at the end of the day, with the way the world is going, it could literally mean the difference between life and death. And that's super important, especially when it comes to protecting our loved ones. As always, guys, please rate, share, and subscribe so I can continue to have the conversations I love to have, and you can continue to get the conversations you love to listen to. As always, guys, take care. Later.